This man descended into the deepest parts of hell, where he confronted the full weight of his sins, including the racism he had carried with him throughout his life. In this dark and terrifying place, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions and the harm he had caused to others. His testimony is one of the most powerful and surprising accounts I have ever heard. It is a story that not only reveals the true impact of his past choices, but also uncovers a transformative and unexpected ending that challenges everything we think we know about redemption and personal growth. What follows is his account, a journey of profound realization and change, one that has the potential to alter the way we view ourselves and the world around us. Here is his account. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. I had intended to keep this to myself, to bury the experience deep within. But after much thought, I realized the world deserves to know. What I witnessed and went through that day holds a significance that might reach far beyond my understanding, something that could be of vital importance to humanity as a whole. My name is Jason Hollow, and I'm from Bozeman, Montana. I was born and raised here, spending my entire life working these lands, building a life surrounded by the quiet beauty of this place. It's a simple life, a hard life, but it's the only one I've ever known. It was November 15th, 2024, a day like many others during this time of year. The morning air was cold and dry, the kind of chill that cuts through your bones and lingers, typical for November in these parts. I woke up early, as I always did, before the sun had fully risen, the stillness of the morning filling the house with an eerie quiet. I made my way out to the barn that had been part of my family's farm for generations, where the animals always waited, restless and demanding, ready for the day ahead. The animals were their usual impatient selves, each one eager for their feed. And there was the stubborn bull, the one who had always been the most difficult to handle. I had dealt with him countless times before, and despite his ornery temperament, I had learned to manage. But that day, something was different. As I approached the bull to feed him, something shifted. Without any warning, he turned sharply and, with startling speed and force, kicked me square in the chest. I didn't see it coming. The impact was so sudden and intense that it felt like the wind was knocked completely out of me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't make a sound. My knees buckled, and I collapsed, my vision blurring and the world spinning around me. The pain was blinding, and before I knew it, I felt my body go numb, slipping into darkness. I don't know how long I was out, but it felt like time stood still. And in that moment, everything changed. Describing the moment is difficult. It's hard to find words for something that felt so utterly unnatural. It was as though the air was violently ripped from my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't draw in any air. There was no sound, no gasp, no cry, no relief. I tried to scream, to call for help, but not a sound escaped me. My body was frozen, unable to react. My knees buckled beneath me as the world seemed to tilt and fade. And in an instant, I collapsed to the ground. Everything went black, as if I had been sucked into a void. My vision blurred. My ears rang with an unbearable pressure, and I could feel the weight of my own existence slip away, leaving me in a deep, endless blackness. When I woke, I found myself in a bottomless, suffocating darkness. It wasn't just the absence of light. As one might imagine, it was a weight, a crushing force pressing in on me from all directions. I felt trapped, as though I had been buried alive. entombed in a place with no escape. It was an oppressive, immobilizing sensation, like I was stuck in an infinite grave, a place where time had no meaning and the very concept of space was lost. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, and the complete silence enveloped me, swallowing all sound, all sensation. It was so profound that it felt as though my mind could no longer comprehend it. It was deafening, and it filled me with a deep, consuming sense of isolation, a loneliness so pure. It was unbearable. I couldn't tell how long I was in that void. It felt like both an eternity and an instant. Time itself seemed irrelevant in that place. It was a moment that dragged on and on. But at the same time, it didn't seem to exist at all. The only thing I was certain of was the growing dread inside me, a feeling that something was coming. It was an unsettling sensation that crept up from within, making my heart pound harder in my chest. The feeling of something approaching became overwhelming, as though the very fabric of that darkness was shifting, drawing closer. Something was waiting, something I couldn't yet see, but I could feel its presence, looming ever nearer. Then, the silence was violently broken. Screams tore through the stillness. At first distant, faint whispers barely audible in the vast emptiness. But soon, they grew, swelling into an overwhelming cacophony that reverberated through every inch of the darkness. The voices were wild and chaotic, filled with an unmistakable anguish and fury that seemed to claw at the very air. Though I couldn't comprehend their words, I felt the depth of their torment, their agony pulsing through me like an electric shock. The screams were not just sounds, they were raw, visceral emotions that shook me to my core. And then, without warning, flames erupted before me. At first, they were small, flickering like the faintest spark, but they quickly grew, roaring into a massive inferno that sliced through the thick, oppressive darkness. The fire moved with an unnatural force, as though it was alive, its flames bending and twisting in unnatural shapes. The heat was immediate, fierce, and unrelenting. And yet, there was something more to these flames than mere fire. They carried an intensity, a power that felt almost sentient, as though they were reaching out to claim me. The darkness that had consumed me just moments before was now ablaze with fire, and the agony that filled the air seemed to grow with the flames, becoming a force I could no longer escape. These flames didn't just burn, they demanded my attention with a terrifying, almost magnetic force. As their intense light flickered and danced, something began to take shape within the fire. At first, the figures were shadows, blurred, indistinct, and almost fleeting. But as the flames grew higher, they became clearer, more defined, and the horror of what I saw slowly crept over me. The shapes twisting within the flames were unlike anything I had ever seen. Were they human? Or were they something else entirely? The figures that emerged from the inferno were grotesque and distorted, their bodies contorted and stretched in unnatural ways, as though they were never meant to exist. Each one moved with a jerking, unnatural motion, as if they were trapped in the flames. Their forms bent and warped by an unseen force. Their faces, if you could call them faces, resembled human beings. Yet they were hollow, devoid of any emotion. Their eyes were dark, vacant voids, completely empty, staring with an eerie intensity that seemed to pierce straight through me. Their mouths, frozen and eternal, silent screams, were wide open, but no sound came. The screams were contained within them, trapped in the infinite torment of their existence. It was as though they were caught in a never-ending cycle of agony, their suffering too deep to ever escape. And yet, in the absence of sound, The silence of their screams was even more horrifying. As one of the figures drew closer, I could see its hands nothing but skeletal remains, blackened and charred like pieces of coal, glowing faintly with an ominous heat. The hands moved slowly, almost deliberately, with a kind of eerie grace that made my stomach churn. Every movement they made sent a haunting hum through the air, a deep, resonating sound that seemed to drill into my mind, leaving a lingering, unbearable pressure behind. It approached me, and the moment it spoke, I felt my very soul tremble. The voice that came from it was an unsettling mix of soft whispers and deafening screams, both at once, like 1,000 tortured souls crying out in unison. "You belong here," it said, its voice curling around me like a noose, tightening with every word. The sound echoed through the darkness, reverberating in every part of me until it felt like the words themselves were crushing my spirit, dragging me deeper into despair. "Your heart was dark," it continued, and those words hit me like a hammer. They didn't just hang in the air, they buried themselves into the deepest corners of my mind, replaying all my actions, my choices, my failings. There was no hiding from the truth now, no way to escape the brutal clarity of the moment. This place wasn't just some torment, it was a reflection of everything I had done, of everything I had been. As the flames continued to rise, they grew brighter, and the figures within them became more distinct, more real. The flickering light revealed something that made my blood run cold. Their faces began to reflect mine. At first, it was subtle, just a hint of familiarity in the shapes of their features. But soon it became undeniable. Each one of them wore a twisted version of my own face, contorted in ways that made my heart race with dread. One of the figures stepped closer, and as it did, its features morphed completely into my own. Its face was no longer just a distorted reflection, it was me. But not me. Its hollow eyes locked onto mine. And in those eyes, I saw an anger that seemed to know every dark corner of my soul. It was as though it had been there with me, watching, knowing everything I had ever hidden, every secret I had buried deep within myself. The rage in those eyes wasn't just directed at me, it was a reflection of the very anger I had allowed to fester inside me for so long. In that moment, I wasn't just facing a being of fire and torment. I was confronting the most twisted, hidden parts of myself, parts one had never wanted to acknowledge, parts one had tried to bury and forget. The pain and fury that emanated from this figure were not just the consequences of my actions, they were the truths I had tried to escape, the darkness I had allowed to grow unchecked. Amidst the raging fire, warped and twisted structures began to materialize from the depths of the flames. Shattered towers rose from the ground, their jagged edges reaching toward the sky like broken skeletons of once mighty monuments. Cracked stones littered the ground, and massive, crumbling walls stretched endlessly in every direction, as though this place had no boundaries, no end. It was a landscape of ruin, a place where chaos and destruction reigned. Yet there was a strange, unsettling connection between everything, though it made no logical sense. It felt as though everything was somehow tied together in a web of pain and despair. Chains hung everywhere, some suspended in the air, swaying gently in the oppressive heat, while others were tethered to unseen anchors buried deep in the ground. These chains weren't merely objects, they were a presence in their own right, their very existence a manifestation of suffering. The sound of them clanging together was unbearable. More than just noise, it was a physical sensation, a blow to my senses that struck at the very core of my being. Each clink of the metal reverberated through the darkness like an electric shock, filling me with an overwhelming sense of dread. The noise seemed to carry the weight of an eternal punishment, and every strike of the chains felt as though it was designed to tear at my soul, inflicting terror in a way words could not describe. The ground beneath me cracked wide open, sending a violent tremor through the air. And from its depths, a massive chasm yawned before me. From the very heart of that abyss, a beam of light shot upward, slicing through the thick, oppressive darkness. But this was no gentle, comforting light. This light held something far darker, far more unsettling. It wasn't just light, it was a vessel for the cries of lost souls, their anguished wails echoing within it, trapped in the very fibers of its radiance. Each cry, each tortured sound, seemed to reverberate through my bones, clawing at my mind with a pain I couldn't escape. I wanted to look away, to shield myself from the terrifying light that seemed to call me. But I couldn't. It was as if the light itself had a magnetic pull, drawing me closer, forcing me to face it. It was like a mirror, but not one reflecting my physical form. No, this mirror reflected something much deeper: every mistake I had ever made, every fear I had buried, and every sin I had committed. The light forced me to see them all in full clarity, each one laid bare and undeniable. The weight of every wrong, every choice, crashed into me like a flood, overwhelming me with guilt and regret. I couldn't turn away, couldn't escape. It was as if the very essence of my soul was being exposed. And in that moment, I could no longer deny who I was or what I had done. Then, a new scream pierced the air. This time much closer, much more personal. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, to see a figure dragging itself toward me. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its form was twisted, contorted beyond recognition, a grotesque shape that seemed to defy the laws of nature. The pain that emanated from it was palpable, thick with suffering, so intense that I could feel it crawling under my own skin. Each movement it made was agonizing, as if it were bound to a torment too cruel for words. With every dragging step, its hands, their charred, skeletal remains struck the ground, and with each touch, they burst into flames, igniting with an unnatural fire that only seemed to add to its torment. The flames consumed it, but it showed no sign of stopping, no sign of relief. It continued its slow, agonizing crawl toward me, its eyes locked onto mine with an expressionless emptiness that chilled me to the bone. And then, from its lips, came a single phrase, a whisper, but a whisper that felt like it was spoken directly into my soul. "There is no escape." The words echoed in the air, resonating with a truth I couldn't deny. In that moment, I realized the full weight of what I was experiencing. There was no turning back, no way out of this place. The torment wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. A prison of the soul with no escape, no redemption, no hope. The figure's words hung in the air, heavy with finality, a grim reality I couldn't escape from. As the flames continued to climb higher, consuming the air around me with an unrelenting hunger, I began to understand the true nature of this place. It wasn't just a physical location, a realm of torment or punishment. It was something far deeper, far more personal. This place wasn't merely where I had been sent, it was a reflection of everything I had done, thought, and hidden deep in the darkest corners of my being. Every action, every choice, every thought I had tried to bury was laid bare before me. There was no escape from the truth. The figures in the flames, once twisted and indistinct, now became clearer, more defined. Each one was horrifyingly familiar, and yet alien in their suffering. As they took shape, I realized with a sinking feeling that these figures were not strangers, not some faceless beings that existed apart from me. They were manifestations of my own actions, the choices I had made, and the paths I had chosen, each one an embodiment of my past mistakes and the consequences I had avoided facing. These figures were not just tormenting me, they were me. They were the reflections of my guilt, my sins, my darkest fears brought to life in the flames. Each one of them seemed to look at me with the same silent accusation, as though they were the living embodiments of everything I had failed to confront. The truth of who I was, of what I had done, was now impossible to ignore. There was no longer any hiding, no more excuses. Every wrong I had ever committed, every moral failure I had ever tried to justify, was now right before me, screaming silently in the flames. The darkness seemed to seep into my mind, slowly invading every thought, every corner of my consciousness. And with it, memories began to surface, memories from my youth that I had long since buried. These weren't mere recollections of days gone by, they were so vivid, so detailed, that it felt as though I was reliving them in real time. Every sensation, every emotion, was as raw and real as if it were happening in front of me once more. One particular memory rose to the surface, an event from my childhood neighborhood. I remembered the day a new family moved in. They were different from us, in every way different in appearance, in culture, in the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves. As a child, I didn't understand the differences, I saw only what was unfamiliar. And when the other kids began to make fun of them, to treat them as outsiders, I joined in. I played cruel tricks, said hurtful things, and did everything I could to isolate them, to make them feel unwelcome in a place they had every right to be. I watched this scene unfold before me, unable to look away. The faces of the children I had once laughed with, the faces of the family I had helped push to the edge, were now etched into my mind. Each one a reminder of the cruelty I had once thought of as harmless. I could feel their pain now, the quiet hurt they must have endured, the fear they must have felt. The innocence I had justified as a child was now exposed for what it truly was: ignorance, hatred, and a failure to see the humanity in others. But now, I wasn't just watching these events unfold before me, I was feeling them, living them as if they were happening all over again. It was as though I had stepped into the very shoes of those I had wronged, experiencing everything they had felt, living through the pain I had caused, the emotions that I had once dismissed, trivialized, or failed to understand. Ignorance, fear, cruelty now surged through me with an unbearable intensity, overwhelming me in a way I could never have imagined. I could feel the sharp sting of the pain in their eyes, that deep, unspoken hurt I had never taken the time to see, the quiet but powerful anger and fear they had buried deep within themselves just to survive. It was as if the weight of their emotions, their suffering, was now pressing down on me, smothering me, and I could no longer escape the truth. This wasn't just a passing moment or a distant memory, it was real, raw, and undeniable. I wasn't just a passive observer of my past mistakes, I had become the very source of that suffering, the one who had caused it all. Every moment from my past, the harsh words I had carelessly spoken, the cruel acts I had justified, the times I had turned away from the pain of others, came rushing back in waves of guilt and regret. Each wave hit me with the force of a storm, drowning me, suffocating me in the overwhelming realization of what I had done. There was no escaping it, no hiding from it. The truth of my actions was now impossible to ignore. And in this moment, I understood, perhaps for the first time, the depth of the pain I had caused. It wasn't just a distant concept, it was a living, breathing reality that consumed me, filling every part of my being with the unbearable weight of guilt. This place, this torment I found myself in, wasn't just an environment of flames and figures, it was a mirror, forcing me to confront every wrong I had ever justified, every wrong I had turned a blind eye to, and every wrong I had simply forgotten or swept under the rug. It was relentless in its pursuit of the truth. And there was no place to hide. All the defenses I had built over the years, the excuses, the justifications, the lies I had told myself to avoid the painful truth were stripped away, leaving me exposed, raw, and vulnerable. There was no escape from the reality of my actions. No way to turn away from the consequences that were now laid bare before me. I was naked, not just physically, but in my soul. The weight of every misstep, every failure to act with kindness, every moment where I had chosen hatred over love, was now all I could see. The words of the figure from the flames reverberated in my mind, relentless and inescapable, like a drumbeat echoing through the very core of my being. Your heart was dark. Those words were not just a statement, they were a revelation, cutting through me like a jagged blade, deep into the very fabric of who I was. It wasn't a judgment from some external force or distant figure, it was the truth of my existence. The raw, unvarnished truth of who I had been, who I had become. A truth I had ignored, buried, and denied for far too long, thinking that I could outrun it, hide from it, or suppress it with my excuses and justifications. But now, in this place, there was no more denying. There was no place to hide from the truth. The darkness wasn't just a fleeting emotion or some abstract concept that could be pushed aside, it was alive within me. A living, breathing part of who I had been. It had taken root in my soul, and it had shaped every action, every choice I had made throughout my life. The prejudice, the fear, the hatred I had carried it all for so long, telling myself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, convincing myself that I was better than I truly was. But in the face of this truth, there was no room for lies or self-deception. The darkness wasn't just in my thoughts, it was in my very being, ingrained in the actions I took, the words I spoke, and the way I treated others. The words "your heart was dark" echoed through me, reverberating in every corner of my mind like a relentless drumbeat. They were etched into my consciousness, impossible to escape, filling every inch of my being with an undeniable weight, a weight that left no room for denial. I could no longer run from the truth of who I had been, no longer hide from the reality of the person I had allowed myself to become. This truth had been with me all along, buried deep beneath layers of justification and excuses. But now, in this moment of reckoning, there was no escaping it. It wasn't just a truth that I could brush aside or deny, it was a truth that was cruel in its clarity, unyielding in its force. It pierced through the walls I had built around myself and left me exposed. I had to face it, there was no other choice, no way to avoid it any longer. There was no redemption here, not yet. No forgiveness to offer me peace. No absolution to free me from my guilt. No escape from the reality that surrounded me. The only thing left was the overwhelming weight of everything I had done. The knowledge that I had caused my own torment, that I had created this hell with my choices, my actions, my words. I had constructed this reality for myself. A life built on fear, prejudice, and selfishness. It wasn't just a series of mistakes, it was the foundation of my existence, the framework upon which I had built every part of who I was. My choices, my actions, my words, they had all been shaped by these things. And now I could see the full, unvarnished result of that construction. The fear I had nurtured, the prejudice I had allowed to fester, the selfishness that had guided my decisions, they were no longer hidden or disguised. They stood before me, undeniable and glaring, impossible to ignore. I had created this, built this torment from the ground up, brick by brick, choice by choice, and now I was forced to endure the consequences of that construction. There was no escape from the truth of it. no way to run or hide. I had been the architect of my own suffering. And in this moment, in this place where all pretense and illusion had been stripped away, I was left with nothing but the weight of my own creation. There was no place for denial here. No corner to retreat into where I could shield myself from the pain of my actions. The comfort I had once found in pretending it didn't matter, and ignoring the harm I had caused, was gone. There were no excuses left to hide behind. No blame to shift onto others. It was just me and the raw, painful truth, standing before me in all its cruel clarity. There was no escaping it. I had to face it. There was no more pretending. No more lies to comfort me. The truth of my life, my choices, was laid bare, and I had no choice but to confront it fully, without the protection of excuses or the illusion of righteousness. In that moment, the enormity of what I had done became all-encompassing. It wasn't just a passing thought or a fleeting realization, it was a crushing weight that enveloped every part of my being. Every wrong I had committed, every decision I had convinced myself was justified, every time I had put my own needs above others, these actions, these choices, were no longer distant memories or vague regrets. They had become my present reality, standing before me with undeniable clarity. The consequences of everything I had done were laid bare, and they were not abstract concepts to be pondered from afar. They were the cold, hard truth of who I had become. There was no barrier left between me and the truth, no veil to obscure the magnitude of my actions or to cushion the blow of their impact. I could no longer hide behind excuses, rationalizations, or self-justifications. The pain of it was raw and immediate, cutting through me with a force that left me breathless. The silence around me was deafening, but not because of any external noise. It was a silence born of the profound realization that there was no more room for self-deception, no more place to retreat into comforting lies. In that silence, the weight of my own conscience pressed down, and I was left to reckon with myself in the most uncomfortable. There was no escape. The truth had finally caught up with me, and there was nowhere left to hide. The deep, dark reality of who I had been stood before me, undeniable and inescapable. There was no more pretending, no more rationalizing, no more running away. But in that raw and vulnerable moment, something shifted within me. I realized that this moment of reckoning was the only path forward. There was no other choice but to face it, to stand fully exposed before the darkness inside me, to allow it to burn through me. The weight of that truth was immense. But in that moment, I knew I had to let it wash over me completely. There could be no transformation, no healing, no redemption, without first fully embracing the painful reality of who I was. I had spent years protecting myself from this very truth, hiding behind justifications and self-deception. But now, in the face of it, I understood that there was nothing left but the truth itself, stripped of all illusions, all shields. There was no way forward without acknowledging it, accepting it for what it was. It was terrifying, but I knew it was the only way. There could be no forgiveness, no peace, no hope for anything better if I did not first confront this truth. And so, in that moment, as I stood face to face with the harsh reality of my past, I understood there was no other way but through it. There was no shortcut, no escape, and no easy road. The only way out was through the pain, through the acceptance of who I had been, so that I could begin to build some. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.